You! I heard a woman behind me exclaim. I jumped. Me? I asked. I turned around. I knew this woman, by reputation more than anything else. She had never taken the opportunity to speak to me before. Her name was Gretchen, and she was in charge of the March of the Southern Belles for this year's Heritage Day Parade. Turn back around, she said. Me? I asked, but I did. From behind I could feel her fingers as they ran across, not my butt, but the little patch on the back of my levis. Are these pants tight on you? She asked. Not really, I said. Why? Lisa, she called. Lisa was my girlfriend. I had just dropped her off here at the parade's organizing headquarters where, I assumed, she would already have been off somewhere changing into her antebellum dress for the parade that would be starting in a couple of hours. I twisted around again, and now saw Lisa, smiling wickedly. I half hoped she would already be in her gown. I had my digital camera with me to take photos of her before all the belles would assemble in formation, but she was still wearing the sweatpants and t-shirt she's been wearing when I'd brought her here. Sweetie, she asked. Why aren't you dressed yet? I asked her. She laughed. You said you wanted to get a good look at the girls in their pretty hoop dresses? We'll have to get some makeup on him, Gretchen said. I told you that wig would look good on him, Lisa said. And his coloring is perfect for that dress, Gretchen nodded. Dress? I asked. Lisa smiled. Yes, sweetie. Dress. Huh? Hopefully, Gretchen said, if we put him somewhere in the middle of the group, nobody will pay particular attention to his face. I'll notice, Lisa said, coyly. Suddenly it dawned on me what they wanted. Lisa stepped towards me and gently took my hand. Sweetie, she asked. I was speechless. You're not going to ask me to do what I think you're going to ask me to do. What did you think I was going to ask you to do? She asked innocently. I blinked. Gretchen cleared her throat. As I'm sure Lisa has told you, the March of the Southern Belles has been a cherished part of this Heritage Day parade for nearly 60 years. I'm aware, I said. For years now I'd always enjoyed the Heritage Day Parade, and had always been mesmerized by the colorful display of femininity each year as the young ladies in their gorgeous pastel-colored ball gowns marched up Main Street, each of their elaborate petticoats as wide as an entire lane of traffic, a veritable sea of ruffles and crinoline. In fact, I'd hounded Lisa into volunteering this year, and was looking forward to finally seeing her dressed in what she described as bright yellow chiffon, taffeta and satin from head to toe. Somebody's sick or something, I said, my voice hoarse. Lisa smiled. Do you remember Erica? I did. I also remembered that she was about my height. We cannot have any holes in the bell formation, Gretchen said soberly. 36 dresses, 36 girls, 4 across and 9 deep. The hoops are over 5 feet in diameter. We cannot afford to have even one missing girl. The hole left behind is too big to fill. And we can't do 5 rows of 7, Lisa said. Or 7 rows of 5. 35 girls just doesn't work. The numbers don't crunch and neither do the hoop skirts. He'll have to shave his face, Gretchen said. That's not a problem, Lisa said. She was still holding my hand, and now she began to pull it. Gretchen dismissed us with a sudden wave of her hand. Just make him presentable, she said. Come on, Lisa said, pulling me up the hallway. You're serious, I said. You're going to need your own dressing room, she said. Luckily, I can get dressed with you. That way I can make sure you're as pretty as possible. Dumbly I followed her into a small dressing room where the first thing I noticed were the massive hoop skirts hanging on the wall. Next to them, on a rack, were 2 brightly colored, but shapeless masses of frills and satin. One was yellow, the other was lavender. On a table in front of a mirror were two floppy hats, again, one was yellow and one was lavender. And a wig. "Take off your pants," Lisa said, closing the door. "What?" "We don't have much time," she said, reaching for the button on my jeans. "Hang on," I said, putting my digital camera on the table. "Let me get my shoes off." "This is going to be so much fun," Lisa said, suddenly pulling her tank top off. She giggled. "You are going to look divine in lavender, darling." I hurriedly pulled off my pants and stepped out of my socks. With a bare foot, Lisa naughtily kicked them into the corner, where they disappeared underneath all of the colorful ruffles. However, she bent down and picked up my socks. "We'll need these," she said. "For what?" I asked. She was holding something white and lacy. "T-shirt too, sweetie," she said. "Turn around." I looked around to see something lacy, white, and stiffened by wires, being placed around my stomach, extending up and covering my non-existent chest with two stiff, empty bra cups. "This is your corset," she told me as she began to fasten it in the back. It gradually grew tighter and tighter. I felt my stomach being pushed in. "Am I going to be able to breathe?" I asked her, as I heard her grunt behind me, straining to attach the device. "Breathe, yes," she said. "Eat, probably not." She laughed. "You're enjoying this," I told her when she was standing in front of me, inspecting me. "Absolutely," she said. "Let's get you in your pantaloons right now." "My what?" She was behind me again. I turned to see her holding up what looked like a pair of satiny lavender long johns, except these had an elastic waist and frilly lace trim around the leg holes. "Oh my God," I said. They were the girliest thing I'd ever seen in my life. "Come on," she said. "Either you can put them on yourself like a big girl or I'll put them on you." I took them from her. With a sigh, I closed my eyes and stuck my foot into them and pulled it up one leg. They felt soft, unlike any material I'd ever worn before. "Oh my God," I said again, as I put my other foot in them and pulled the elastic waistband up over my hips, the fabric oddly sensual against my otherwise naked penis. Suddenly there was a distinct tenting in the front of the undergarment. Lisa giggled. "Luckily, with the hoop skirt, we won't need to tape that down." "Tape that down?" I only gaped at her as she was now wearing a pair of yellow pantaloons of her own. Like mine, they went all the way down to the bottom of her ankles, which were ringed by 3 layers of lace ruffles. On her anyway, they looked cute. "Sit down," she said. I did. The sound of running water and the shaking of a can of shaving cream let me know what was next. I sat there stupidly as Lisa coated my arms, armpits, chest and face with a layer of shaving gel, then expertly zipped it off with a few strokes from a pink Venus divine. The absence of anything remotely masculine in my life was becoming all too apparent. There was even a knock on the door. "Do you ladies need anything?" a woman called. "We're fine," Lisa said, giggling. She picked up the socks that I had taken off earlier and tucked them against my chest, into the empty bra cups. Standing up, I was struck by how feminine the outline of my body suddenly was. My waist was tucked into where it appeared to be narrower than my hips, and with breasts, I momentarily paused to stare down at myself. "Come on," Lisa said. I turned around. She had now put on her petticoat. I counted 6 hoops of gradually increasing circumference that, indeed, must have measured at least 5 feet across down around her ankles. She was unhooking the other hoop skirt from the wall. "Take this," she said. I did. It was made of cotton, and although the hoops were able to bend slightly, they tended to immediately regain their shape. I struggled to figure out how to put it on. You step into it, Lisa was saying. I leaned over and gingerly stepped across the hoops with my satin pantalooned leg, placing both lace-frilled ankles inside the waist opening. Then I pulled the skirt up with both hands, and like magic, the hoops draped down around the lower half of my body as though I'd been a Southern belle my whole life. Lisa stepped towards me, and our hoop skirts bent slightly oval to accommodate each other. She twisted my skirt around until she found a drawstring, then she pulled it tight and tied a bow. I looked down. My penis was still not exactly shriveled up, but it was now shrouded with satin and frills. I wasn't even sure if I could reach it to touch it at this point. "Are you ready?" Lisa asked. "For what?" She smiled. "For your ball gown, silly." My ball gown. Holy crap. Lisa had found a zipper somewhere in the middle of all of that lavender satin. I recognized a limp dress bodice and the cute little puffy shoulders where my arms would have to go. I gulped. With Lisa and I in our hoop skirts, the room had suddenly gotten very small, and I was aware of the persistent rustling that all of this taffeta made as we moved. Lisa smiled gently at me. "I'm going to love the way you look in this, sweetie," she said, and I realized that she meant it. She had both hands underneath the dress now and held it up. "Put out your arms," she said. I did. I was conscious of the socks on my chest as, with a slight grunt, she worked the bodice over my forearms, then gently moved them up so that the massive skirt fell over my head and past my shoulders. My field of vision was engulfed with bright lavender before a thick row of ruffles brushed past my face. I felt my arms go through the holes of the short sleeves, and the silky smooth satin of the dress slid down, settling easily over my hoops. "Turn around," Lisa whispered gently, and I did, my skirts turning with me, brushing against both Lisa and the wall. I looked down at all of the lavender that surrounded my legs, at the pretty patterns of ruffles blowing gently in the air-conditioned breeze. As Lisa pulled the zipper up my back, I felt the silky material tightening around my midsection. I gingerly reached down and pushed at one of the hoops. It gave slightly, but the entire skirt moved. I then looked at my shoulders, at the puffy little sleeves, a pretty, perfect lavender bow hanging from each one, and at the larger bow between the pair of socks strapped to my chest, except I no longer looked as thought I had a pair of socks strapped to my chest. I looked as though I had breasts, especially with my freshly shaven chest and arms. "Stop enjoying yourself and zip me," Lisa said. She was now draped in yellow satin and ruffles, except the back of her dress was unzipped. My hands trembling, I gently pulled the little zipper up past her strapless bra and up to her shoulder blades. A yellow bow rested gently at the small of her back, its streamers hanging down the back of her skirt. I contorted myself slightly to see if I had a bow like that behind me as well, and I did. When I looked back at Lisa, she was holding my digital camera to her face. With a pop, the flash bulb went off. "Oh great," I said. I heard her gasp as she looked at the photo she had taken in the little screen in the back of the camera. "Look at you," she exclaimed, holding it up so that I could see. I was astonished to see myself on the little camera screen with my now girlishly trim waist rising from a bell-shaped skirt, the pattern of ruffles looking like icing on a lavender cake, my hairless arms daintily touching my bosom, but I was horrified to see my head on a woman's body. "You like?" Lisa said, grinning hugely. "I think I need to put the wig on," I said, trying to sound casual. Lisa must have heard the urgency in my voice, however. "Let me do it for you," she said. She had me sit, first trying to tell me how to do it. If I sat with a hoop underneath my butt, she told me, the front of my dress would fly up, but I had already managed to arrange my skirts, and when I sat down, she laughed and said, "I didn't have to show you how to sit in a hoop skirt. You have more Southern belle in you than I thought." I sighed as I sat, my skirts ballooned around me, and then I felt Lisa put the wig on my head. She was standing in front of me, frowning and making adjustments to my new bangs. Then she said, "Close your eyes." I wanted to say why, but didn't. Suddenly I was feeling very passive and gentle. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Shortly I felt Lisa adjusting my wig yet some more, but differently this time. Then I felt the unmistakable sensation of satin against my skin yet again, this time as she tied a ribbon underneath my chin, and now I knew what she was doing. I smiled. "May I open them yet?" I asked. "There," Lisa said gently. "Open them." I did. Lisa was holding up a pocket mirror, and there was my reflected face, beneath a lady's hat with a wide, floppy brim, trimmed, of course, with still more lavender ruffles, a lavender bow tied underneath my chin. I moaned. "Are you okay?" Lisa asked. I was crying. "What is it?" she asked. "I look ugly," I said. "You do not." "My face," I said. My voice was cracking. "I look like a boy in a wig. I need makeup." Lisa smiled and leaned in underneath the brim of my frilly hat and kissed me on my lips. "Close your eyes and give me a few more minutes," she said. I closed my eyes again and relaxed, taking a moment to enjoy all of the various sensations my body was enjoying, from the tight, stiff, yet weirdly feminizing corset to the cool, silky satin of my pantaloons. My ankles, I knew, were ringed by 3 layers of frilly lace somewhere underneath all of these skirts. The long hair of the wig was soft and warm against the back of my bare neck, and I could feel the air conditioning gently blowing the ruffles on my shoulders against my skin. "There you are, sweetie," Lisa said. "Now put on your gloves while I finish getting ready. We've only got about another 5 minutes." "But what about shoes?" I asked. Certainly I wasn't going to be walking the length of the parade route barefoot, but I didn't want to get all dressed up only to have to wear my dirty old Nikes underneath all of this. "I'll have to get you in heels another time," Lisa winked as she handed me a pair of soft, flat-soled slippers. "Your gloves are on the counter." "They're the lavender ones," she added. Still sitting, I reached down underneath my dress, managing to find my feet and put the slippers on them. I stood then, the hoops immediately resuming their shape around me, and saw the gloves she was talking about. When she said gloves, I assumed she meant gloves that ended at the wrist like men's gloves. Not these. Like the gown, they were a shimmering lavender and looked about 2 feet long. I picked one of them up, inspected the finger arrangement, and figured out which arm it would go on. Then I slid my hand inside and felt that now familiar sensation of smooth satin surround and envelop my arms, my fingers eventually finding their individual slots as the end of the glove went past my elbow, almost to the bow at the end of the puffy little sleeve. My fingers suddenly looked beautiful, slender, soft, and of course, lavender. At the inside of my wrist, I noticed, were now 3 little pearl-shaped buttons again, lavender. I picked up Lisa's pocket mirror with my gloved hand and shuddered. She had made me beautiful. My lips were now a bright red, my eyes carefully shadowed and mascaraed and gorgeous. I told myself not to cry, as it would ruin the effect, and reached for my other glove. It was slightly more difficult, as it was more difficult to get a good grip with fingers encased in satin, but I managed. "Are you ready?" Lisa asked. I whirled around. It was hard not to whirl as I turned, what with this gigantic dress turning with me, but Lisa now had her hat on and she looked gorgeous, just as I'd imagined, yellow from head to toe. "What?" she asked, batting her eyes. I shook my head and felt the ribbon tied beneath my chin trace a path across my bare upper chest. It was hard to suddenly act the part of predatory male dressed as I was. My penis was again stirring hell, it was sticking straight out, but one glance below my waist and all anybody could see was ruffles upon ruffles upon ruffles. I tried in vain to smooth out my skirt with a gloved hand when I heard Lisa open the door. "Let's go," she said. I could hear voices outside. Goodness gracious, I said. People were about to see me dressed like this. Was I ready to let them see me? I took a deep breath, looked at Lisa, my sister Southern Belle, and smiled. For some reason, I was indeed ready. Clutching at my petticoats with my lavender-colored fingers, I prepared to squeeze my way through the door. Clutching at my petticoats with my lavender-colored fingers, I prepared to squeeze my way through the door. Outside I could hear a continuous and entirely feminine murmur. As I stepped forward, I felt Lisa's hoops pushing at my skirts from behind, and I quickly stepped forward, lest anybody see under my raised hoops and catch a glimpse of the lace and satin pantaloons that went all the way down to the top of my girlish slippers. Although my dress was far too wide for the doorframe, a gentle squeeze was enough to allow me through, my hoops snapping back into place as I entered the slightly more spacious hallway, slightly being the operative word. Many of the other girls were already dressed and assembled, chit-chatting excitedly as they awaited further instructions from Gretchen, standing literally hoopskirt to hoopskirt in an ocean of chiffon. Some of the belles were wearing light green, others baby blue, others girlish pink from head to toe. At least one girl was wearing a lavender gown, identical to mine. I didn't recognize her at first underneath all over her feminine accessories, but when she turned and saw us, I recognized her voice. "Lisa, you did it," she exclaimed. It was Carrie, Lisa's best friend and coworker. "Doesn't he look gorgeous?" Lisa squealed back. "Yes. Yes. Yes." Carrie squealed back, and before I realized it, she was compulsively embracing me with her long, lavender gloves, our skirts compressing together. I dumbly reached around her and felt the shape of her trim waist through my satin gloves. "I can't believe it!" Carrie exclaimed. Her outburst had caused enough of a commotion to attract the attention of the rest of the girls. Almost in unison they craned their necks and absently adjusted their skirts in order to see what all the fuss was about. Lisa pulled one of my gloved arms back and interlocked her yellow satin fingers with my own. "I saw him first, Carrie," she said, her tone mockingly stern. I heard giggles from the other belles, as well as other snatches of conversation. "That's Lisa's boyfriend," I heard one girl say. "How did she talk him into it?" somebody asked. "He looks better than me." "Oh my God! Is he wearing the pantaloons and everything?" Flustered, I smiled nervously and tried to find something to do with the arm that Lisa wasn't clutching. If I let it hang straight down, it fell into the folds of my dress, which somehow didn't seem right. I looked at the other girls, and noticed how all of them were keeping both of their elbows bent at their sides at about a 90-degree angle, their gloved hands hovering at about the waist level of their petticoats. I looked down and put my hand in the same position, and noticed how when I let my wrist go limp while in this position, it looked somehow appropriate. "We could use him at the club," Carrie was telling Lisa. "He'd make a beautiful hostess." "Don't joke about that," Lisa said. "His hours just got cut again. We need all the help we can get." Carrie exclaimed. "How would you like to be a hostess, sweetie?" Lisa asked. "Ho or hostess?" I asked, trying to deflect the question. Lisa gave me a scolding look, but Carrie spoke up next. "Does he have nice legs?" Carrie asked. Lisa said, coyly, smiling demurely and fluttering her eyelids. I looked at her in wonderment as she did this, and she then looked back at me strangely. "What?" she asked. "I don't know," I said. I felt very strange at that moment, to say the least, but before I could say anything else, I heard Gretchen's voice boom among the din. "Ladies, may I have your attention, please?" We all fell silent, save for the persistent rustle of crinoline. "Thank you," Gretchen said. "As you have all probably noticed, we have found a replacement for Erica. Please warmly welcome her." "Welcome her?" I thought, but I saw a lovely show of satin fingers fluttering in my direction. I smiled and waved back. There was not a lot of room in the hallway. My hoops kept getting nudged this way and that. As Gretchen delivered her last-minute instructions concerning the forthcoming parade, I licked my lips nervously and tasted the unfamiliar lipstick that Lisa had put on them. Would my wig stay on straight for the duration of the parade? This ruffled lady's hat was the largest item I'd ever worn on my head, and fear of knocking its floppy brim askew impeded me from any sudden head movements. I felt Lisa's fingers digging into my wrist through my gloves. "Pay attention," she whispered. Gretchen was now demonstrating the proper way for a Southern belle to wave to parade-goers, and the other girls were raising their hands in imitation of her, revealing their delicate glove buttons. I tried to copy her as well, keeping my elbow close to my waist and moving my hand from side to side rather than up and down, but Lisa nudged me. "Left hand," she hissed. "Why?" I whispered back. "You'll be carrying a parasol in your right hand," she said. Of course I remembered. Good Lord, how could I forget? And of course it would be lavender and trimmed with still more copious ruffling. I pressed my satin-covered legs together underneath my hoop skirt and shuddered. And waved. "I want to see smiles," Gretchen announced. I looked around and saw smiles. Some of the other belles were even smiling at me. I waved girlishly at them and smiled back. "This is your last chance to powder your noses, ladies," Gretchen told them. "We need to be lined up and ready to go at 9 o'clock sharp." With that she suddenly turned her back on us and walked away. "Do you need to powder your nose, sweetie?" Lisa asked me. I crossed my eyes and tried to look at it. "You tell me." "She means go to the bathroom." "Oh," I said. I looked around. Many of the other girls were already halfway up the hall. I did have half a cup of coffee earlier. "You'd better take care of business then," Lisa said. "Luckily for you, you won't need to wait in line." "I won't?" Carrie was listening to this. Oh, I wish I could see him trying to pee in his hoop skirt. I turned the logistics of the activity over in my mind, and suddenly had a new appreciation for what these girls were putting themselves through to dress like this. It would probably be relatively easy for me to void my bladder in this outfit, and I was very happy I didn't need to, or sit on the toilet or anything. Or stand in line, for that matter. All this talk about urinating, of course, didn't help me to not want to do it. How long was the parade route, anyway? Then I remembered after the parade, where would I be? Surely the men's room here would be safer than any public men's room at the other end of the parade route. There was so much I didn't know about what lay ahead for me this day. "Take your gloves off first," Lisa said. I gingerly pulled at the fingertips of my gloves. "He looks so ladylike when he does that." Carrie gushed as I slid the gloves off my arms. "Try not to wrinkle them," Lisa said. "Did you want me to hold them?" "I can handle them," I said. They hung limply against my gown. "He needs a purse," Carrie exclaimed. I looked at the door marked men, which was right next to another door where a half-dozen girls in identical antebellum costumes were semi-patiently lined up, and took a deep breath. They looked at me somewhat jealously as I, still clutching my gloves, pushed myself and my skirts through the door and into the men's room. The bathroom was empty, of course. This was the most breathing room I'd gotten in several minutes, and it contained the first large mirror I'd seen since putting on the dress. Catching a glimpse of myself, I gasped. Then I slowly walked towards the mirror, my reflection gliding towards me from the opposite direction, the ruffles on my skirt bouncing slightly. My face was smooth, clean, pale. With the floppy lavender bow tied girlishly under my chin, my soft bangs and my bright red lips, the masculine features of my face were almost hidden. The row of ruffles across my chest had a decidedly feminine slant to them, thanks mostly to my rolled-up socks, and my shoulders looked narrow and delicate. I felt a stirring down below that was not being caused by my bladder. I carefully draped my gloves across the towel dispenser, turned around and approached a urinal with added urgency. I pulled up my dress, hoop by hoop, and looked down at my lavender legs with their lacy ankle trim and ruffled petticoat backdrop. I'd never seen a girl in undergarments so frilly, although I'd certainly wished I'd had. Lisa was right. For years I'd always enjoyed seeing these girls in their pretty dresses during the Heritage Day parade, and my desire to see Lisa in all of this 19th century finery was possibly based upon something less than G-rated. I untied the string at the waist of my bloomers and pulled down the elastic waistband. The caress of the silky bloomers against my groin was exquisite. As I stood there at the urinal, what I did next was the most unladylike thing that I would do all day. I'd rather not say exactly what happened, other than to say that after it happened, I stood there stupidly for at least a full minute, holding up my skirts and hoops with one hand and holding down the waistband of my pantaloons with the other hand, breathing heavily, before I was able to relax long enough for the urine to begin to flow through my now, significantly more subdued, manhood, being extraordinarily careful to not splatter anything on my beautiful gown. My beautiful gown. For a few hours, anyway. What a comforting thought. When I was positive that I was completely finished at the urinal, I retied the string on my pantaloons, my exhausted little Winky grateful to return to the luxurious satin confines. I then stepped backwards as I flushed the urinal, dropped my hoops, and turned back around to look at myself in the mirror again. I wished for a full-length mirror, as in this one I was only unable to see most of my endlessly flowing skirts, but I noticed now how the precious little puffy shoulders of the gown rose a full 3 inches, perfectly framing either side of my face, and I took another step towards the mirror, fascinated by all of the exquisite detailing that I kept discovering, enthralled by how my dress moved as I did. I took my gloves back from where I'd left them hanging, and watched myself in the mirror as I slowly drew them back up my arms and over my elbows. "Hey, sweetie," I heard a familiar voice say softly, breaking me from my reverie. It was Lisa. "Do you like what you see?" "You're not supposed to be in the men's room," I said, smiling. "I wasn't sure if you needed any help," she said. "Did you pee?" I nodded shyly. "You look beautiful," she said. "So do you," I said, and she did. In her bright yellow ruffles, she looked as wholesome and as beautiful as a girl can get, and suddenly I had to kiss her right then and there. Even wearing a ball gown, my love for her suddenly felt no barriers, and I took her in my arms and kissed her gently on the lips, so as to not smear our lipstick or knock our hats askew. Even though I had just reached some sort of literal sexual climax only moments before, the glowing warmth I felt right then was far more lingering and profound. She reached up with her yellow gloves and adjusted my bangs. "We've got a lot of walking ahead of us," she said. "I feel as though I'm walking on air right now," I said. "Well," she said, smirking naughtily, "you might not be saying that later this afternoon." I shrugged, removed my fingers from her waist, and turned to look at myself one last time. I doubted just then that it was possible to feel any more exquisite than I did just then. I smoothed my gown over my hoops, more for the pleasure of doing so than to smooth any wrinkles, and finally tore myself from the mirror and from Lisa. I glided over to the door and gallantly pulled it open with my satin-covered hands, and she curtsied just before she squeezed past my hoops and back out into the hall. "Lisa!" Gretchen called. "There you are. You're going to be in row 2. She handed Lisa a card with a large number 2 printed on it. "You'd better join your row." I watched as Lisa quickly gathered up her skirts and made her way out of the building to the parking lot, then stood there stupidly as Gretchen seemed to not notice me as she intently studied a clipboard that she was holding. "What about me?" I asked, trying to sound feminine, even adding a slight drawl to my speaking voice. Gretchen said absently. She looked up. Oh, she said, looking down at her clipboard before she did something completely unexpected. She looked back up at me again and actually smiled. I nervously touched my bosom in response. Enjoy yourself out there today, she said, sounding suddenly warm. Remember, it's fun to be a girl. I nodded, smiling. Blushing, almost. Then Gretchen's smile vanished as she handed me a card with the number 6 printed on it. Go outside and find the 3 girls who are also in your row. And do not leave without your parasol. Outside, I thought. Outside, as in public. My heart rate began to increase. Clutching my card, I took a deep breath and started for the front door. Walking in hoop skirts wasn't actually difficult at all. If I needed to pick up the pace, it helped a little bit to lift up the front of my dress, but my legs were able to pretty much move under my skirts unimpeded. Doors and doorways, however, continued to be a nuisance, especially doors like these that were designed to swing shut on their own, obviously invented after hoop skirts went out of fashion. I also wasn't sure about pushing open the door using my gloves, as I didn't want to soil them, and I had no idea how many other grubby hands had pushed through those same doors since they had last been properly cleaned. I was certainly becoming quite prissy. Luckily, Gretchen had apparently thought of everything. Before I got within 5 feet of the door, a young man sprang to his feet and immediately pulled open the door for me, standing back to allow all of my petticoats past. Seeing another male so soon after leaving this hyper-feminine cocoon made me feel even more special. He was wearing a drab polo and khakis and nearly faded into the wall as a result. He looked at me, however, only with respect and acceptance. Could he tell? I couldn't tell if he could tell. He just smiled at me sincerely, and I smiled back and whispered thank you, to which he gently replied, "You're welcome, miss." I smiled some more upon hearing that, and if I felt soft and pretty before, I felt absolutely glorious as I emerged from the building into a beautiful spring morning, the polite young man keeping the door open for me until after the last of my voluminous petticoats were clear of the doorway. It was easy to see where I needed to be. The large phalanx of multicolored Southern belles assembled in the parking lot were probably visible from space. I held up my number, and was directed to 3 other young ladies also holding 6s. They introduced themselves to me. The belle in pink was Claire, the belle in baby blue was Brandy, and the belle in light green was Laura. "And what's your name?" Brandy asked, winking. "I'm Lisa's boyfriend," I said, and everybody giggled. "But you need a girl's name." I was stumped. "I guess I do," I said finally. There wasn't much time for girl talk, however. One of Gretchen's assistants came by then and lined us all into columns. I was put in the middle, between Laura and Claire. Brandy was on the far left. The girl in front of me was wearing orange. She turned around and smiled. "You look very pretty," she said. "So do you," I said, and I meant it. All of these young ladies looked about as beautiful as a young lady could possibly look, as far as I was concerned. I leaned slightly to my left to try to catch Lisa's eye, for a rows up. She saw me and waved. She already had her parasol cradled in her right arm, twirling the open canopy over her shoulder. Laura said to me, and I turned to see another of Gretchen's assistants holding a lavender parasol out to me. I accepted it, stopping to study the delicate ruffle-trimmed cap of the umbrella. It looked perfectly impractical. It really didn't offer much more protection from the elements than my hat did, but as I cradled it in my gloved right arm like all the other belles did, I felt absolutely beautiful. I suddenly realized that I was more or less trapped at this point. All of my male clothing, indeed my ID, my cash, my keys, was stuffed in the corner of a dressing room in a building that I was about to walk away from, with no idea when, or how, I would return. This costume, this gown, whatever else you might call it, would be the only clothing available to me for the indefinite future. Bolting at this point would be problematic as well. I was surrounded by girls in hoop skirts. Even if I did try and squeeze through, would they try to stop me? And where would I go? Dressed this way, I really couldn't possibly belong anyplace else. I had hardly any time to ponder this, however. Suddenly the columns of bells ahead of me were beginning to move forward, out of the parking lot. I concentrated on the girl ahead of me, on the orange blouse she was wearing at the small of her back, and when she began to walk, so did I, along with the other girls in my row, and then the row behind us was moving as well. The parade had begun. Ahead of me I could hear the din of the crowd as they spotted the first row of girls exiting the parking lot and turning left to go up Main Street. The route, I knew, lasted from 2nd Street West all the way up to 20th Street East. "Stay in your rows, ladies," I heard Gretchen calling from somewhere. As I stepped up across the slight grade of the parking lot and onto Main Street, I lifted the front of my dress to avoid tripping on it. Smiling, I raised one gloved arm, revealing the lovely little lavender buttons at my wrist, and began to wave at the assembled parade watchers. The parade had begun. "Stay in your rows, ladies," I heard Gretchen calling from somewhere. As I stepped up across the slight grade of the parking lot, I lifted the front of my dress to avoid tripping on it, before turning left onto Main Street with the rest of the bells in my row. Then I smiled, raising one gloved arm and revealing the lovely little lavender buttons at my wrist, and began to wave at the assembled parade watchers. What had happened to me this morning, anyway? It was all a delicious blur. Just a few short hours ago I had rolled out of bed, hopped into the shower, sucked down a cup of coffee, yanked on a pair of jeans and a t-shirt, and dropped off my girlfriend Lisa at the local community center so she could get dressed up in antebellum finery to march in the annual Heritage Day parade. It was a day off for me. I didn't even bother shaving. My plans for this morning hadn't really proceeded past the idea that I would need to somehow traverse the crowds of parade watchers quickly enough to be able to keep up with Lisa and the rest of the Southern Belles in order to take plenty of photographs. Well, I had figured out a way to keep up with Lisa and her sisters, all right and all without having to fight the crowds. As I absently put my hand down on my hoop skirt in an effort to keep it from swaying too much as I walked, I realized that I was putting a greater and greater distance between myself and my personal belongings, specifically my male belongings. My pants, t-shirt, sneakers, keys and wallet, everything male I owned was piled up in a dressing room back in the community center. Everything except for my tube socks, that is. I had those with me, although not on my feet. Lisa had rolled them up and wedged them into the bra cups of the tight corset I was wearing. Looking down at myself, however, they now more closely resembled a feminine swell of bosom underneath a row of ruffling that stretched across my bodice. I raised my lavender-gloved arm again, looked over at the throng of people lining Main Street, and waved at them, being sure to wave my hand from side to side rather than up and down. Did any of them suspect I was a boy? If they did, I saw no surprised glances or double takes that would seem to indicate it. Mostly I just saw smiling faces. Many of the women in the crowd were waving back to us, their daughters jumping up and down with glee at our pretty gowns, and the men, especially the young men, simply seemed to be gawking at us. I knew what they were thinking. Every year I found this explosive display of femininity so powerful that I could only gape and marvel at the young women who projected it so effortlessly. I know the thought had never occurred to me in years past that possibly there was a man in their midst. Luckily, it was a beautiful spring morning. As we continued walking, I was grateful that there wasn't a cloud in the sky, as I doubted that the little parasol I had cradled across my right arm would be able to withstand even a modest drizzle. The summer humidity had yet to arrive, and there was just enough breeze to keep me cool as I continued up Main Street, waving and smiling all the way. Of course, part of the charm of hoop skirts is their impracticality, and the logistics of 36 of them unfurled in formation occasionally caused some interesting distractions. Each of our dresses was wide enough to where I could look down at the streets and see how we were each taking up an entire lane of traffic. Believe me, those petticoats easily stretched from one set of lines painted on the pavement all the way over to the next. Underneath my gown I was wearing a pair of soft, satin, lavender pantaloons that matched my dress. Every time I needed to pick up my skirts for some reason, my ankles were clearly visible, ringed with 3 rings of lace ruffles along with the flat-soled women's slippers I was wearing. If wearing a ball gown wasn't girlish enough, if wearing a wig and makeup wasn't girlish enough, if wearing long satin gloves that went up past my elbows with little buttons at the wrist wasn't girlish enough, well, the pantaloons definitely were the icing on the cake. These frilly, long girlish pants that pretty much could only be worn underneath a hoop skirt, they really served no other purpose, it seemed, other than to offer an additional prissy layer of feminine modesty to a Southern belle with a sudden need to publicly adjust her hoops. And the hoops did tend to require constant attention. At this point I had been in my hoop skirt for well over an hour, quickly learning their do's and don'ts out of sheer necessity. Sitting was tricky, although not impossible. Going through doors usually required a gentle squeezing of hoops, and it was important to make sure all of my skirts were through the door before it closed behind me. I had yet to walk up a flight of stairs, although I knew that even a slight grade required a girl to clutch one of her hoops and lift it on a flat surface. The gowns, even with all of their materials stretched across those 5-foot hoops, still reached the ground. The hoops also mandated that I keep my elbows bent, letting my arms hang down loosely only left my hands awkwardly buried in my skirts. Fortunately, keeping my lavender parasol in the crook of my right arm, the frilly open canopy behind me kept that arm occupied. As for my left hand, when I wasn't waving at the masses, I tended to just let my hover near my waistline, my hand hanging limply at the wrist, instead of swinging my arms like, well, a man. The fact of the matter was that wearing all of that female paraphernalia forced me to move in a more feminine manner. Walking with smaller, quicker steps proved more hoopskirt friendly, as too much forward momentum tended to cause the hoops to dip to the front. If I needed to pick up my pace, however, I then needed to lift my dress in order to quickly catch up with her, knowing that I was exposing my prissy, lacy ankle bloomers to dozens of spectators. And yet, for all of that, I found myself in a state of sheer bliss. The wholly sensual pleasure of wearing and displaying such feminine splendor was profound. As we continued up Main Street, I began to feel slightly out of breath, but that was due mostly to the corset I was wearing, and I found that the enhanced feminine posture it provided me more than made up for any discomfort. I felt an intense tingling from my satin-tipped fingers all the way down to my slippers, and I realized as I marched that I owed it all to my girlfriend, Lisa, who was 3 rows ahead of me. It was she who had helped me with my wig and makeup and tied the hat ribbon under my chin into a fetching floppy bow. Conniving to dress me as a Southern belle and slip into the parade was entirely her doing. It seemed as though the longer I knew her, the more she seemed to unlock within me. I had nagged her to sign up for the parade, knowing that there was no way anybody would ever turn away her natural, warm beauty from such an event, but also because I enjoyed the fantasy of her wearing all of the accoutrements of a Southern belle. If I loved her, it was because she apparently seemed to somehow understand that in participating in the parade would allow me to not only live out one of my unspoken fantasies through her, but also because she was the kind of girl who enjoyed being a girl, who enjoyed expressing herself as a female, with all of the joys and experiences that went with it. This is what attracted me to her. If she did wear pants, they were typically something cute and cropped. She never wore sweats, and although she wasn't afraid to wear something that flattered her curves, she was never whorish in her attire. Indeed, she worked in a private club as a hostess, which required her to wear a skirt, hose, and heels every day, which she did without complaint, along with a soft, cream-colored uniform blouse that I just loved. It had a high neck, yet was just sheer enough to reveal just a hint of her camisole or bra provided she was not wearing the peach uniform jacket that matched her skirt. I thought she looked marvelous in the suit. I loved the way she felt, all soft and silky to the touch whenever I hugged her after a long day. I also enjoyed it whenever she left for work with her hair swept up into a glamorous twist, away from her face and neck and revealing the delicate little buttons on the back of her blouse collar. Sometimes she would ask me to help her button all of those back buttons in the morning, and after putting on all of her clothing and makeup, I was always jealous at the womanly satisfaction that she projected when she would sit at her vanity and indulge herself with one last spray of perfume before putting on her final accessory, a gorgeous string of pearls that had belonged to her grandmother, and looked even more beautiful when delicately draped against the bodice of her soft, ivory blouse. And of course, now, as she marched up in the second row, she looked effortlessly radiant as she waved at the adoring crowd, not needing to adjust her skirts as they instinctively accommodated her femininity. Unlike me, I was becoming more feminine to accommodate my skirts, as she flashed the crowd her brilliantly beautiful smile and waved girlishly with a yellow-gloved hand, with the pretty little yellow buttons at her wrist. I snapped out of my reverie as I bumped the girl in front of me with my hoop skirt yet again, which, of course, caused the girl behind me to bump me with hers as well. Then the girl ahead of me suddenly picked up her skirts and scurried to catch up with the rest of her row. I giggled, lifted my hoops, and did the same. Then I glanced over at the crowd and saw a sea of smiling faces and even a few cameras. They had probably gotten pictures of my pantaloons just then. I smiled back and waved with my left arm, my right arm still holding the parasol, its frilly canopy resting on top of the back of my hoop skirt. I looked across at the other side of Main Street and saw even more smiling faces, and I smiled back some more and waved in that direction as well. I could have marched in my ball gown all day, but alas, as we grew closer and closer to 20th Street and the end of the parade route, I knew that one of the most thrilling experiences of my life was dwindling away. I kept waving, however, determined to enjoy every last minute of the occasion, and the ever-present crowd smiled and waved back. I looked at all of my sisters around me, and they all looked so breathtakingly beautiful and feminine. As I raised my arm to wave at a cluster of little girls, I saw my own puffy little shoulder sleeve raise in the air. I looked down at myself, at my wide lavender skirts with all of the fluttering. I clutched my pretty parasol and felt the satin on my legs, and suddenly I was feeling very, needy. Lisa was only a few yards away, but dressed as we both were, I could only fantasize about her for the time being. It seemed as though it had only been a few short minutes since I had been in the men's room, my skirts fortunately hoisted high. And then, alas, the parade ended. For the Southern Belles, anyway. Behind us the bands were still playing and the floats presumably still rolling past the spectators, but as we went under the traffic light at the intersection of 20th and Main, Gretchen was standing in front of the police cars blocking the end of the parade route, frantically waving her arms, directing us over to the park off to the left. Our carefully assembled, color-coordinated formation began to fall apart as we turned. Some of the girls sighed with relief, apparently with fatigue. "How did you enjoy that?" Brandy, one of the girls in my row, asked me. "I loved it!" I exclaimed, and she just laughed. "I'm just glad it's over with," she said, sounding weary. Not me, I thought, as I lifted my dress to step up on the curb, and then I saw Lisa. She was already standing in the grass on the other side of the sidewalk, grinning broadly at me and twirling her yellow parasol. Still clutching my skirts, I ran over to her and embraced her, our hoop skirts askew as I held her as tightly as I could. "Kiss me," she said. "In front of everybody?" We were outdoors, after all. "Oh, fiddle-dee-dee," she cried, and suddenly planted her lips on mine. Below all of my petticoats, my pantaloons stirred some more. "I see London, I see France." I heard one of the girls, probably Carrie, singing. I looked down at my dress, pressed snugly against Lisa, and realized that my hoops had lifted up in the back. How far, I didn't know, but I loosened my embrace of Lisa and stepped back. "I do declare," she announced, "that I need to rest a spell." I looked around. There were several park benches, but all of them were already being used by other Southern belles, and each bench barely accommodated 2 hoop skirts. Lisa was pulling my gloved hand with her own, and I followed her over to a patch of bright green grass. I watched as she sank to the ground, her dress gracefully collapsing in a perfect circle around her. I bent at the knees as well, and as I lowered myself, I enjoyed the breeze as the air trapped under my skirt slowly eased through the outer edges of my petticoat, and the grass felt cool against my legs through the satin pantaloons. "How do I look?" I asked. "Is my makeup holding up?" "Your nose needs powdering," Lisa said, pulling off her left glove. "Literally?" She laughed. "You look radiant," she told me. "So do you," I said. She dropped her eyes to the ground and blushed. "Thank you," she said. I watched as she slowly peeled off her other glove, and then coyly reached down into her cleavage and pulled out a compact. "Lean this way," she said. I did, and she dabbed at my nose and cheeks with some powder. "Much better," she said. "Thank you," I said. "One more thing," she said, producing a tube of lipstick. "Hold still," she said, before expertly tracing it around my lips. "There," she said. "Thank you," I said. "This has been one of the best days of my life." "You're welcome, sweetie," she said. "How did you know?" I asked. She giggled. "Oh, a girl can just tell," she said and winked. "I can't wait to get you home," I said. She opened her mouth and raised a hand to it in mock horror. Then she smiled naughtily again. "Don't you want to get out of those petticoats first?" "Maybe," I said. "Maybe," she said. "Maybe not," I said. She giggled. "How are we going to get back to the community center, anyway?" I asked. "They're chartering a couple of buses." "You don't think any less of me when you've seen me dressed like this?" I asked. She laughed and shook her head. "I think more of you than ever, sweetie," she said. The sunshine splashed across her face at that moment, and with that pretty yellow hat and the ribbon tied below her chin, she was the most beautiful woman in the world. "You make a beautiful Southern belle," she said. "The bus is leaving, ladies." Gretchen was calling. "Yikes," Lisa and I said in unison. As quickly as we could, we both got back onto our feet, picked up our parasols and attempted to straighten our skirts back out over our hoops. "Unless you ladies want to walk back," Gretchen shouted. I wouldn't have minded walking back, but for Lisa's sake I picked up my skirts and followed her over to the waiting buses. The rest of the girls were already on the buses, watching us, probably giggling at my pantaloons. "I'll need those parasols," Gretchen said, holding out her hand. Lisa handed hers to Gretchen, and so did I. Reluctantly. She gave me a sympathetic look and said, "There's 2 seats left in there," pointing to the bus. "Ladies first," I said to Lisa, and smiling she lifted her skirts and pushed her way through the narrow door and up the steps onto the bus. I followed, and as I lifted my skirts I noticed the driver idly staring at my legs with an odd half-smile on his face, not even looking at my face. Lisa had found a seat near to the center of the bus and her skirts were ballooned around her, but I was able to scrunch mine in next to her as the bus pulled away from the park. "I can't wait to get back to that dressing room," I said to her quietly. She lifted an eyebrow. "Why? You can't wait to take off your pretty gown?" "Not that," I said. "I can't want to be alone with you." My voice dropped to a whisper. "I'm about to explode," I told her quietly. Her mouth silently formed an O shape, before she licked her lips carefully and whispered back, "Sweetie?" "What?" "I need to tell you something." "What?" I asked again. "We're not going back to the community center." "We're not?" She shook her head. "Not yet," she said. Right now they're taking us over to the ladies' auxiliary for the annual brunch with the bells. Remember? Suddenly I did. If I had written it off before, it was because the brunch was an event to which I had not been invited. Apparently my participation in the parade had changed all of that. Marching over 20 blocks in full Southern Belle regalia was a dream come true, and I would gladly have marched another 40 blocks, if necessary. Still, it did feel good to get off my feet after my stint in the Heritage Day Parade, even if that meant squeezing my hoop skirts onto a bus bound, I thought, for the community center where I had left all my male belongings behind that morning. It wasn't that I was all that eager to get out of my bulky gown and petticoats. In fact, I was having the time of my life. But, as I whispered to my girlfriend Lisa, who was sitting next to me as the bus pulled away from the park, I was eager to get back to the dressing room, if only for the opportunity to be alone with her at last. Her response was not what I expected. Instead of smiling, or even blushing, her expression had been that of surprise. "We're not going back to the community center," she had told me. "We're not?" I asked. She shook her head. "Not yet," she said. "Right now they're taking us over to the ladies' auxiliary for the annual brunch with the bells. Remember?" Suddenly, I did. If I had written it off before, it was because the brunch was an event to which I had not been invited. Apparently my participation in the parade had changed all of that. I looked down at my lap and began to nervously touch the buttons on my long satin gloves with a lavender-tipped finger. "What happens at brunch with the bells?" I asked. "Well," Lisa said, "they present each of the bells to the ladies' auxiliary and they serve brunch." She giggled. "Other than that, I'm really not sure." "Well, I've never attended a ladies' auxiliary function," I said. "So here's your big chance," Lisa said. "You'll be fine," she assured me. "I'm sure they'll herd us around wherever we need to go. Just smile and be ladylike and enjoy being catered to." "Okay," I said, but I was nervous. This promised to be the sort of close-up scrutiny that I was able to avoid when I anonymously stashed in the middle of a parade formation, one face among 3 dozen. The brunch with the bells was being held at the historic Carriage House, a beautiful old lakeside mansion that had been restored by the local historical society. It, and the lovely grounds surrounding it, were often used for weddings. Upon our arrival at the Carriage House, several of Gretchen's assistants were waiting for us as we each squeezed our hoop skirts out through the relatively narrow bus door. I was pulled aside by a no-nonsense woman who was all business as she refluffed the skirts of my gown back out over my petticoat and brushed at the ruffles on the brim of my hat. I looked over at Lisa, who was pulling her long yellow gloves back onto her arms and getting a similar ones over. Then the rest of the bells and I were herded over to a nearby garden. When I saw the man on the ladder apparently holding a camera, I started to feel somewhat nervous, but when it became evident that we were all gathering for a group portrait, I relaxed. The camera needed to be a long way away to fit all of us and our gowns into a single frame. In fact, some portable bleachers had been set up for us, and a young man took my hand and pulled me up to my assigned perch in the back row, where I stood with all of the taller girls, giggling as we tried to not get poked with each other's parasols. We posed for several photos, and then we were led, not to the Carriage House, but over to a lovely little white gazebo on the edge of the lake behind the house, where we all found ourselves waiting in line. Lisa was at the front of the line, and when she was led to a spot in front of the gazebo, I could only marvel at the effervescent way in which she tossed her hair, twirled her parasol, and smiled gloriously for the camera. I immediately wondered where and how I could get a copy when it struck me that I was going to have my picture taken alone like that as well. I almost broke out in a sweat. These were professional portraits being taken, I realized, the sort of high-quality photo that can be blown up to the size of a poster or even a billboard, if necessary, and not exactly something I would want the world to be able to see for posterity. As each girl was led up to the gazebo, one by one, I looked around to see if there was any way I might be able to duck out of the line, but it was hard to feel inconspicuous in head-to-toe ruffles and lavender, and besides, Gretchen's assistants were lurking. Suddenly I felt a hand gently nudge one of my puffy little sleeves, and I turned around. It was Lisa. God bless her, the girl knew how to read my mind and ease all my doubts and insecurities. "What?" I asked her. She motioned me closer with a satin-gloved finger. I leaned over and she whispered in my ear, "You are so beautiful today," she said. "I want to have this photo of you today, so I can always remember how beautiful you are today." Standing so close to her, I inhaled her beautiful, natural aroma and closed my eyes. Once again I wanted to kiss her, on her lips, and very hard, but I was wearing lipstick, and such an action on my part might lead me to the sort of stirrings below my hoops that, well, needed to wait until later. "Okay," I said. "Next." I heard Gretchen shout. I turned around, my mass of petticoats twirling with me. I realized that it was my turn. Taking a deep breath to compose myself, I tightened my grip on my parasol, and began to walk over to the spot in front of the gazebo. And yet, suddenly there was no need to steady my hoops by clutching them as I walked. I was suddenly gliding in an effortless, ladle-like manner, like the Southern belle I was privileged to be this morning. I found my mark in front of the gazebo. Looking down, it was impossible to see my feet, but I knew that I was standing on it. After a couple of hours, wearing a hoop skirt had become completely natural for me. On the count of 3, the photographer called. 1, 2, 3. My elbows bent, my gloved hands hanging limply at my waist, the frilly canopy of my parasol resting on my skirts behind me, I tilted my head in a feminine manner and smiled in a manner that I hoped would communicate to the world how wonderful I felt at that exact moment. "Beautiful," the cameraman said. I saw no outward sign from him that he could tell I was male. "Next," Gretchen shouted. I stepped off my mark and was now directed over towards the back entrance of the carriage house. Lisa was waiting for me. "I hope you like it," I told her. "I'm sure I will," she smiled. As we both entered the house, the door was held for us by an older gentleman, who told us, "Take the stairs straight ahead, ladies." I picked up my skirts and followed Lisa up a staircase that fortunately was just wide enough. At the top of the stairs we were directed to a large, parlor-type room. One of Gretchen's assistants greeted us at the door and told us that if we needed to use the ladies' room we could, but that we needed to remove our hats and gloves and be back in the hallway and lined up as soon as possible, as the guests were already being seated downstairs. As I entered the room and looked around, I was immediately drawn, as if hypnotized, to a mirror on the far wall, the first mirror I'd seen since I'd been in the community center before the parade, and the first full-length mirror I'd seen all day. As I walked towards it, I saw my full skirts bounce gently, along with the ruffles across my bodice, the beautiful lavender satin that went up past my elbows and the prissy way in which I now automatically kept my gloved hands hanging loosely at my wrists, down in front of my waistline. "I think she sees something she likes," Carrie said, and I did. I saw, not myself as I'd resigned myself to looking a boy in a wig and a hoop skirt, making a fool of himself out on Main Street, no less but a strange, yet softly beautiful creature with distinctive and unmistakably feminine features and mannerisms. I smiled, and the girl in the mirror smiled back with my familiar smile. I then saw another familiar feminine vision in yellow suddenly come up behind the girl in the mirror and playfully lift her lavender skirts. I caught a brief glimpse of my own slippered feet and ruffled ankles before I whirled around, turning my hoops with me, and stuck out my tongue at Lisa. "Do you need to powder your nose, sweetie?" she asked. A few girls were waiting to use the restroom, but most of us had apparently planned ahead and were checking each other's hair and makeup. "Not yet," I said. Lisa nodded as she carefully untied the bow underneath my chin and, with both hands, removed my hat. "I don't want to take off my gloves," I told her quietly. Why not, sweetie? Lisa looked sympathetic, but said, you can't wear them to eat. I sighed, pulled one of them off, and stared at my hand, at my drab, unpolished nails. My hands just aren't as pretty without the gloves. Well, but aren't you glad I took the time to shave your arms? I was, although I had no idea if anybody would notice when I went back to work whenever I went back to work, that was. Carrie had crept up behind us. Lisa, you're going to have to bring him along with you the next time we go to the salon, she said. Very funny, I said. But you can get your nails done with us. Carrie giggled. Don't you want to be pampered? She asked. I looked at both my hands, one gloved, the other naked. I just don't want you to joke about it, I said, quietly. Oh! Carrie exclaimed, but Lisa must have shot her a look as I began to pull off my other glove, because she lowered her voice and said, I'm sorry. If you come with us, I promise I won't tease you. You look cuter than half the girls here, and if you come to the salon with us, you'll love it. I looked up at Lisa. Thank you, Carrie, she said quietly. Lisa, Carrie said, you are so lucky. With a rustle of petticoats she whirled around and walked away. Are you okay? Lisa asked me. She wasn't trying to be mean. Well, I just don't like her joking about that, I said. I mean, you understand that I don't want to be a girl, you know, like get a sex change or anything like that. Oh, I know, Lisa said. Just because you are enjoying this doesn't change anything about you. You don't think it's weird that I'm enjoying this? Sweetie, you're just being you, she said. I mean, you're still you, right? I ran my bare fingers down the bodice of my dress, past my waist and out over my hoops. I think so, I said. Well, I know so. Lisa replied. Now, let's get ready to go back downstairs. I know you're probably famished after all of that marching this morning. I know I am. I had to admit that a bit of my stomach was indeed growling within my corset right then. The now familiar cry of ladies that came from the hallway could only mean one thing. Lisa and I soon found ourselves in the middle of a snarl of hoop skirts as we all lined up in the upstairs hallway. I was in line behind Lisa, and was absently gazing at her when Gretchen grabbed my arm and said, You, dear. What? I asked. I want you to be the final belle to walk down the stairs, she said, pulling me out of the line and back to the end of the hall. But why? I asked, trying to sound ladylike. Because there is somebody here that I want you to meet, and I told her that you would be the last belle down the stairs. That's the only way that she will be able to tell that you are. She didn't finish her sentence. That I'm a guy? I asked. Well, she certainly wouldn't think you were male by looking at you, she snapped. I think she meant that as a compliment. I told her that you would be the last belle down the stairs. But why tell her at all? I asked. This was not what I wanted. I wanted to be a belle, not a curiosity. I don't have time, Gretchen announced, whirling on her heel and dramatically throwing up one hand in dismissal before striding back down to the opposite end of the hallway. I stood there dumbly at the tail end of the line, and when I heard the applause from downstairs and saw the line begin to inch towards the head of the staircase, I assumed that the procession of belles had begun. The next to last girl in line, who was gowned in yellow like Lisa, but not nearly as pretty, turned to me and asked, Do you dress up as a girl very often? I don't think so, I said, as our end of the line was now finally moving forward. She laughed as we began to inch up the hall. You don't think so? I caught a sideways glimpse of myself in a hallway mirror. The sound of polite clapping grew louder. Without my hat, gloves and parasol, I felt naked, but I felt more natural somehow. Or maybe I do, I said. I could see at the end of the hallway ahead as one by one, the girls turned around the corner, apparently to descend the main staircase. The applause from downstairs continued. As I got closer to the top of the staircase, I could see more and more of the sweeping, curved staircase. "Remember," the girl in front of me said, "if you trip, everybody will see your pantaloons." "I'll try not to," I said. "Here I go," she whispered, placing one hand on the banister and taking first one, then several more girlish steps down the stairway. I heard them applauding her as she disappeared around the bend, and I put one hand on the railing, dug the unpolished nails of my other hand deep into my petticoats, inhaled as deeply as I could in my corset, and started down the stairs, taking small, girlish steps. As I rounded the corner, the dozens of ladies who were seated in the main hallway came into view. I hesitated for a moment to smile and survey the room, and that's when the applause suddenly began to swell. I took several more steps when I realized that the assembled ladies, who had all been seated at tables awaiting the serving of brunch, were now all rising to their feet. At the bottom of the staircase, I saw Lisa standing with Gretchen, and a woman I recognized as Maud Herndon, the president of the Ladies' Auxiliary, all of whom were clapping enthusiastically. I touched my bosom before continuing the rest of the way to the landing where Gretchen shook my hand, and Lisa and I kissed each other's cheeks. Then I turned to Ms. Herndon. If she recognized me, she didn't show it. I'd delivered pizzas to her house on more than one occasion, and in my baseball cap and work pants she would never bother making eye contact with me, let alone speak to me. But today, instead of handing me a check and a $1 tip before slamming the door in my face, she smiled kindly, handed me a long-stemmed rose and, like Lisa, kissed my cheek. Then she held me close and whispered something in my ear. "What?" I asked. Given our history, I was uncomfortable being so close to her, especially in my hoops. "Thank you so much," she whispered. "For what?" But she only leaned back and winked at me, before turning and motioning us over to a nearby table that was set for breakfast. The applause mercifully died down as a man in a bow tie pulled out a chair for me. I gathered up my hoops and sat, and he pushed me, and my seat back in. Lisa was to my left. I tried handing her my rose, but she only batted her eyelashes and showed me the one she'd already gotten. I then turned to my right, as the waiter was now helping Ms. Herndon with her chair. "You're welcome," I told her when the applause had died down enough for relatively normal conversation levels to resume. She patted the back of my hand. "You're not the first, you know." "I'm not." She shook her head. "It doesn't happen every year, but it happens often enough. And you were marvelous." "And you know Lisa?" I nodded. "She's a special girl," I said. "How do you know her?" "Why, from the club. She's such a pretty girl." "You're very lucky." "And you?" She patted my hand again as a covered plate was placed before me and my glass was filled with iced tea. "You are a special girl too," she whispered. Brunch was delightful, although I nibbled at my avocado and sprouts sandwich more out of distaste rather than any manifest desire to display appropriately dainty table manners. It was such a pleasure to eat in such exquisite surroundings. The sterling silverware absolutely gleamed, and I'd never eaten off of such beautiful china. Lisa giggled and pointed to the lipstick I'd left on the rim of my iced tea glass. Dessert was a wonderful chocolate pecan tart. I was careful to not get any crumbs on my gown. After the lunch we all listened attentively to Ms. Herndon as she stood and spoke about the history of the Heritage Day Parade and the Ladies' Auxiliary, thanking both the volunteers who worked to create all of the colorful ball gowns and of course, us, the belles. Then a video taken of us marching in the parade earlier that day was screened. The effect of 36 Southern belles filling up Main Street with a sea of pastel colors and crinoline was not lost on videotape, and I indeed had to pay attention in order to spot myself among the belles as we all filed past the camera. I caught a glimpse of myself all in lavender. However, I was smiling hugely, my face framed by my floppy brimmed hat and ribbon and by the twin puffy shoulders of my dress. The full length of my long, satin glove could be glimpsed on my upraised arm as I merrily waved at everybody, and I appeared to be gliding, most ladylike, in my hoop skirt. When the brunch concluded, I gathered my hoops and stood, but I soon found myself surrounded by members of the ladies' auxiliary who began congratulating me, complimenting me, touching me, hugging me, and gushing over me, one at a time. I stood there holding my long-stemmed rose, smiled and repeatedly thanked them, but it seemed as though every last woman at the gathering wanted just a few more seconds with me. I felt grateful for my hoops at that point, as they did afford me a little bit of standing room, if not breathing room, but eventually I began to despair that I would never be able to tear myself away from them. Lisa must have sensed my distress, as she finally squeezed her way up to me, took my hand, and very politely announced that I needed to go upstairs to take care of some personal needs. The ladies all immediately understood, of course, and there was an instantaneous parting of the crowd to allow me back over to the staircase, where I picked up my skirts and began the long upward climb, pausing before I disappeared behind the curve to turn and wave goodbye. While upstairs I found my hat and sat down at a little vanity to see if I could properly place it on my head without Lisa's help. I slowly adjusted the brim behind my head so that it best framed my face, and then began to carefully tie the ribbon below my chin, creating a pretty fair approximation of the perfect floppy bow that Lisa had tied earlier. Then I slid the gloves up my arms, perhaps for the last time, and stood up, enjoying the now familiar feeling of my hoops dropping into position and taking a moment to spin before a full-length mirror, making sure that my skirts were straight in every direction. I needed some fresh air. I went down the rear staircase and exited the carriage house through the back door. I needed a few moments to myself. I wanted to walk the beautiful grounds of the estate in my hoop skirt and enjoy the beautiful lake view one last time before climbing onto the bus to return to the community center. To my male identity, to my pants and t-shirt, my keys, cash and ID. At this point my feelings about having to do this were decidedly mixed. While it would be a relief to be free of the tight corset and the relative inconvenience of the hoop skirt, there was something undoubtedly luxurious about being covered from head to toe with such softness and such beauty. I knew it would be quite a come down to be back on Main Street in the near future, driving in my crappy little tercel stick shift, my front seat loaded down with somebody else's dinner, a magnetic sign on my roof, wearing a scratchy polo shirt with a corporate logo over my heart and being subjected to loud, filthy rap music blasting out of the car next to me. I much preferred eating off of fine china, using a brightly polished bouillon spoon to consume a delicious bowl of vichyssoise, using a linen napkin nestled within the multiple ruffles on my lap to dab at the corner of my carefully lipsticked mouth. There was a lovely swing near the gazebo. I picked up my hoops, sat on it, and redistributed my petticoats around my legs as slowly began to sing and gaze out over the lake. The sun was warm against the exposed skin above my bodice, and I clasped my gloved hands in my lap and relaxed. I closed my eyes and thought about Lisa. Would she be able to look at me the same way after seeing me like this? I certainly hoped she would. Wearing a dress didn't change the way I felt about her, or the way I felt about women in general. I enjoyed being allowed to enter such a feminine inner sanctum, and the opportunity it afforded me to socialize with the women of the ladies' auxiliary, but I was happy to do it without actually becoming a woman. It certainly beat working in a pizza store, dealing with foul-mouthed coworkers and angry customers. As I sat there in my gown, swinging contentedly, I had to reflect that it was the acceptance I had felt from the other belles and from the ladies' auxiliary that was the source of my inner serenity. At first it had been Lisa's support of me, first as a man, and then as a man in a ball gown, that had inspired me to dress up like this, but if dressing as a Southern belle for a day had turned out to be a humiliating experience, I certainly wouldn't be feeling such satisfaction and bliss right now. I looked down at my ruffles and bows for the millionth time and felt no shame, only beauty. And then suddenly I knew that Lisa was behind me, walking over from the carriage house, even though I couldn't see her. I could smell her fragrance, though, drifting with the breeze. I could hear the rustle of her skirts, and the girlish tune she tended to absently hum to herself at odd times. Then I felt her soft, satin gloves on either shoulder, and I reached up to touch her hand with my own. "I wish I had my pants with me," I said. "You do?" Her tone was surprised, upset. "Why?" I gathered my skirts and slid off of the swing. "Because," I said. I turned, looked at her, and fluttered my eyelashes. She looked disappointed. "Well," she said softly, I don't mind you in pants. It was just fun having you in skirts today." "And I had fun in skirts," I said. "It's just that I wasn't expecting to be in skirts. I wasn't prepared." "Well," she said, I thought about asking you last night if you wanted to do this, to dress up, but I was so afraid you'd sleep on it and decide not to do it, even though I had a hunch you'd be telling me that because you thought I wouldn't want you to." She balled up her hands into small yellow fists. "I was in love with the idea of you as a belle. I wanted a southern belle of my own to love. I was hoping to get you in a hoop skirt even you didn't want to wear one, and I was hoping you'd have fun." "I had fun," I said. "This has been one of the greatest days of my life. It's just that there was something that—" I tried to find the right words. "That what?" she asked. I took a deep breath. "I was waiting for the right moment," I told her. I'd been waiting for it, but it hadn't come, and I wasn't sure if it would ever come. "What is it?" she asked. I took both of her small hands in mine. "This is that perfect moment that I was waiting for, and I just wish that I had my pants with me. But not so that I could wear them." "Well, why then?" she asked. As we stood there in front of the gazebo overlooking that beautifully calm lake on such a lovely spring day, I held both of her hands in mine. "Lisa?" I asked. "What?" She was beautiful. The floppy yellow ribbon below her chin fluttered slightly in the breeze, and I felt her fingers tighten around mine. Very slowly, I dropped to one knee. My hoops and my dress sank towards the ground with me. "I wish I had my pants," I told her, because for the past 2 weeks I've been carrying around a ring in my pants, and it's still in my pants, back in the dressing room at the community center. She gasped. Then her eyes began to rapidly blink. This would have been the perfect moment, I started to say, but she put a single, yellow, satin-tipped finger to my lips. "Don't say anything else," she said. "Let's not say anything else until we get back to the dressing room." "Okay," I said. We just looked at one another for a minute, and then I stood up. I felt her arms go around me, and I held her close. "Kiss me," I told her. "We'll mess up our lipstick," she giggled. "Frankly, my dear," I told her, "I don't give a damn." "Ladies!" Gretchen shouted. Once again we were the last 2 belles to get on the bus. We squeezed into the last 2 seats and rustled against one another for the entire ride. And when we arrived back at the community center, we were oblivious to the world as we silently walked, her yellow-gloved hand in my lavender-gloved hand, and when we finally got back to our dressing room, we entered it together, and then we closed the door behind us.